Good morning, everyone. I, again, don't know who's out there. We got to see a number of you yesterday, and we were able to deliver quite a few of our Sunday School Quarterly books. If you wish to have one and we failed to get one into your hands, I had to make a few backtracks yesterday, trying to be very careful, but evidently had more variety in the order than of which I was aware. And we delivered one student's book, and somehow or another, we sent out another copy of the old Isaiah study guide. But those are both corrected now. But if for some reason you didn't get the version that you needed, let me know. I'm glad to have you tuned in today. We just went to a few places and didn't go past the porch or the front yard, and so started out kind of a rainy endeavor. But I think we only made one or two stops in the rain, and the sun came out. But we're glad to see some of you that we haven't seen in a very long time, and I appreciate Danny and Liz and Terry joining us on that trip. Got to see some folks, and we were being very careful not to spread infection. Well, we are still suspended. We're not meeting on our on-site campus on the church property. We're not congregating. And again, was the very dire reports on statistics and about infections, positive testing, deaths due to the coronavirus just in the state of Alabama just for this week. I was telling Danny yesterday, I saw that most serious deaths, it mentioned how many people were killed. Of course, it was December the 7th, how many people were killed at Pearl Harbor, and then how many people died on 9/11. And the third one was Thursday. So it wasn't a terrorist attack or a act of war, but Thursday and Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday were bad days and very difficult times. We're still receiving a lot of contradictory information, medical and political advice. The best thing to do is to limit your contact with anyone and everyone that you can. We made different arrangements for celebrating our Thanksgiving with our family. We're having services. I'm hearing some services had chosen not to meet and are starting to meet again. It seems to be a strange choice when things are worse now than they were when we first did the lockdown. But you have to use your own judgment and use wisdom. And to some extent, we do have a control of how much we expose ourselves and how much we expose ourselves to others. So limited circulation, but we still have those of us who get out of the house at all still have contact with people. We began last Sunday our first lesson in the Gospel of Luke, and that's what our quarterly is about. If you know of some folks who need a little bit of inspiration and need to get it that might benefit emotionally, spiritually, mentally, intellectually from stirring their mind up and their heart up about from the Scriptures, let them know that we're studying the Gospel of Luke. We did the introductory material yesterday and read the first few verses. We looked at the Gospel of Luke's place in the New Testament canon. Back in the mid-1800s, during the time of the Enlightenment, during the time of great intellectual advance, and at the beginning, and just prior to the Industrial Revolution, a great deal of liberal theology began to arise from the Tübingen School there in Germany and other places. That seemed to be the heartbeat of that movement. And it became commonplace for liberal teachers, people who proclaimed themselves to be Christian, and yet had little faith in the orthodoxy, of the orthodox teaching of the church, or the traditional beliefs that Christians had espoused of the Scriptures. And so the idea was proposed that the story of Jesus that we have today came through a process of building mythology. That Jesus came, he was just a simple rabbi, had a few people following him, just a smattering here and there, maybe, possibly as many as 12. And very few people knew anything at all about him. Nobody much ever heard about him. And he died in obscurity. But then, because of certain charismatic people, they would say, primarily the prize was given to Paul the Apostle. Saul of Tarsus was a hater and a persecutor of the church who became a Christian, and because of his missionary journeys, he began to spread the story of Jesus and began to embellish upon it. Well, you can read, there's in the 27 books of the New Testament, you can read that many of the books in the New Testament were written by Paul. But he doesn't talk very much. He doesn't teach about the gospel story of Jesus, the earthly life of Jesus. He deals with the doctrine as it began to develop after the resurrection, and the things that he says that Jesus, or that God delivered to him, and how we are to take what we know about Jesus, or what Jesus, his purpose and who he was, and begin to develop our understanding of who Jesus was and what that means and what impact that should have upon us, to teach about the details of salvation as he does so clearly and in such a detailed fashion in the book of Romans. That Jesus never claimed to be God. He never did any miracles. He just was a rabbi, a teacher. He was an itinerant, traveling preacher. Yes, he did die, and he may have been crucified by the Romans, but he most certainly did not rise from the dead on the third day. But some of the disciples stole his body and began to tell people that he was alive. And in the hysteria, some people even began to tell others that they'd actually seen him. And so over a time of 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, this began to snowball. And finally, after people began telling the story over and over again and adding a little bit more to it and polishing it up, we have the tremendous, amazing story of Jesus. Well, that's just not true. There's no foundation for that at all. That is malicious. That is intelligent. That is gross misconduct of information. Someone who presents himself as a scholar or as someone of renown in the area of historical or theological studies, to claim something like that is only demeaning the history, the true and the genuine history of the church and of Jesus' life. Everything that we see in the Gospel of Luke indicates that he used primary sources. Paul the Apostle was converted to Christianity only a few years after the resurrection. Jesus died and rose again and ascended back to heaven between AD 30 and 33. Only 2 or 3 years later, as many as 4 years later, Saul of Tarsus was converted to Christianity. So we would say around 36, AD 36 or 38, Paul the Apostle was converted to Christianity, and he began his writings. Probably the earliest book, or the oldest book that he wrote, was the book of Galatians. The places that are described geographically, the vocabulary that is used in the Greek text, every kind of internal and external evidence that we can learn about the writings of Paul are that he lived, that he did not live hundreds of years after Jesus lived. His writings were not created so far down the line. You know what? They say that it takes at least 150 years for a genuine piece of folklore or myth to become fully developed. But we find here there is no question, looking at these documents as historical documents, not just religious writings. Some people just scoff at them and say, well, it's just a religious mania that someone has written down. There is a great deal of that in every kind of culture in the world throughout human history. But Luke starts out by saying, I researched this. And he says here, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things that you've been taught. Luke doesn't begin his gospel story by saying, once upon a time, or in a galaxy long ago and far, far away. He is writing as someone that we would consider to be an educated man of his day. Anyone in the first century who could read and write and who could speak the modern languages and record the modern languages was among the most educated people. He doesn't sound like a lunatic or a religious fanatic. This is not presented as some ecstatic deliverance from a stupor or any kind of dream or vision. He's saying this is someone who is a physician. He's a doctor. He is someone who has an understanding of material things of the world and the way of living in life. Someone who, even today, in the medical field, in any aspect of the medical field today, especially doctors, are you'll find them to be some of the most intelligent people that you will meet. And not just on medicine, but on a wide variety of things. They are people who have good minds. You can't be an imbecile and make it through medical school. You have to be able to learn and read, and you have to be able to see things and perceive things. You have to be a detective who can scope things out and discern things. You have to be a scientist. The story of Jesus did not develop over 150 or 200 or 300 years. The story of Jesus, we see that the gospel writings, there is no scholarly accusation that can be brought against the writings of the New Testament to describe them as being simply creations or fictional stories that were amplified and added to. The things that Luke tells us lets us know also that he had access to the writings of Matthew. Matthew was listed as one of Jesus' 12 apostles. Many of the words are written word for word, exactly the same in Luke's gospel as Matthew records them. Luke also had access to the gospel of Mark. And the internal and external evidence, speaking just simply from a textual criticism, is that Mark was recorded very early in the first century, only a few years after Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. So Luke had access to the Gospel of Matthew and as a writing. It's not something that people talked about around the campfire. It was not about oral stories that they shared as bedtime tales, and it became, and eventually someone wrote it down. There were documents. Also, I mentioned last Sunday, the document that many modern scholars have described as Q. It was probably something that was actually written during the earthly ministry of Jesus and was circulating at that time, and it is a possibility that Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all three of them had access to the Q document. And so, what I believe about the story of Jesus is not something that developed as people let their imaginations run wild, and they began to add the wise sayings of Jesus, the miraculous deeds of Jesus, the death of Jesus, the burial and the resurrection, the public sightings of Jesus after the resurrection. They were all recorded only a few years after the events. There's a very great possibility that we believe that most certainly that Matthew had access to Mary, the mother of Jesus. And so Matthew includes the Christmas story in his writings. It seems obvious that also Luke, having access to Matthew's documents, he may have also had access or had personally met Mary as well, the mother of Jesus, and he knew the Christmas story. Actually, Luke found out more about the Christmas story than Matthew records in his gospel or that Mark records. We're going to see a little bit today about the story of Zacharias and Elizabeth and the birth of John the Baptist. That story is unique to Luke. No one else in the Gospels record that story. The documents that we base our faith upon are reliable. Luke here says that he spoke with eyewitnesses. This is not some fantastic account that seemed to take wings and fly on its own. There is no reason for questioning the integrity, the historical veracity of these writings. There's no reason for simply categorizing them as religious hysteria. There is more, we have more pieces, parts, and entire collections of documents that are the records of the New Testament words. We have more proof, more historical and archaeological and textual evidence in the integrity and veracity of the Scripture than we do any other kind of writing, from any other author or about any other subject in human history. Think of all the thousands of books that have been written and all. There are over 5,000 manuscripts that we have in our hands today that are copies of the Greek New Testament. And so there's no reason to look at this and say, oh, that's just a bunch of religious nonsense. That's just a story. It's a fairy tale. It's not at all. Well, let's go on. In chapter 1 of the Gospel of Luke, verse 5, it says, in the time of Herod, king of Judah, there was a priest named Zachariah, who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. His wife Elizabeth also was a descendant of Aaron. Now, what he's saying here, now remember that the first selected person in the Jewish nation to begin the Jewish nation is recorded there in the book of Genesis was Abraham. Abraham and Sarah had a son, Isaac. Isaac had a son, Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, and they formed the 12 different tribes. And so the different sons were tribes of Judah, Reuben, Judah, Zebulun, Benjamin, Joseph. All 12 of those tribes continued through Hebrew history. The tribe that Moses, the great prophet, was in was the tribe of the priestly tribe of Aaron. And Aaron was the very first priest and high priest in the Hebrew religion. And also, it says Zechariah was, and his wife both. Now, you didn't have to be a member of the priestly lineage to be a Jew, but you had to be a member of the priestly lineage to be a priest. You had to be you had to be related to Aaron in order to serve as a priest. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. But they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. Well, he's making a statement. It seems to be unkind to make such a statement or describe someone as being very old. But that was Luke is saying, it's just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. So Zechariah was a priest. Now what happens was that there were hundreds and thousands of people in this lineage. And so priests, the Levitical line, according to the tribe of the Levites, Levi's tribe. If God called you to be a priest and you surrendered to the priesthood, you would train your whole life on how to serve and minister in the temple. But there was only one temple, and probably everybody didn't get to serve, and they had rotations. Someone would communicate to you that you're going to get to do your priest thing in about 3 years, so get ready. So you would spend your whole life. This is not something that you went and, they didn't have the same people working in the temple every day. They rotated people because there were thousands of Levites. This is something that you may say, why, what a coincidence that the soon-to-be father of John the Baptist, that his time to serve would come up just a few months before the birth of Jesus. Why? What an accident that was. Well, it wasn't at all. God's working, and God is designing this to happen. And it says here in Luke's gospel that it came up Zechariah's time to perform his service in the temple. He knew exactly, and it says he was old. No, he and Elizabeth were both old, and this may have been the only time in his entire life that he ever performed these duties. This is not something he did. It wasn't his job. It was his calling. And he had been trained, and he had memorized the scriptures. He knew every footstep to take inside the temple. He knew every utensil. He knew every act. He knew every step and action that he was to take. And so when he got there, he knew exactly how everything was going to work. Have you ever looked forward to something like that? Have you ever? We have a couple of. I think on Liz's side of the family, on our side of the family too, we have members of our family who have taken us to Disneyland. And they have pamphlets and ringed notebooks. They have tickets and wristbands, and they have calendars, and they have a plan, and we're going to eat here, and we're going to stand over there by the fountain, and we're going to go here for photos, and we're going to eat here this time, and we're going to ride that. I say, no, I'm not going to ride that. Y'all ride that. I'll stay outside. Have a good time. Have you ever been involved in a wedding, funeral? I like to plan things. I like to sit down, and even if you look around, you can see Danny has certain things in place for this morning's services. I have certain things prepared. We spend all week long studying and preparing and putting these things in place. And a lot of times things go sideways. A lot of times it doesn't happen the way we planned. Can you imagine? Here's Zechariah, all of his entire life. He dreams about this, and finally, my goodness, finally, he received the call. Come, it's your turn. He goes down there, and everything goes to the wind. Everything goes to the wind. Once when Zechariah's division was on duty, and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot. They drew straws, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And when the time came for the burning of incense, all the assembled worshipers were praying outside. Now that's one thing. We probably have a great multitude of people out there on the internet today, as many as 50 or 60, maybe, and eventually more as people catch us later on. But imagine going into the temple. It's your time. Hit it, man. Do it. It's like okay, Chipper, it's all up to you, you know. The game is in your hands. But not only that, there were many, all of Israel was surrounding the temple. There was a throng outside. And they were relying upon what Zechariah did inside to be applied to their lives and to be meaningful to them. And when the time came for the burning of incense, all the assembled worshipers were praying outside. You see, incense is not really about the smell. It's even more than just the ingredients of the incense. Now, you couldn't offer strange fire before the Lord. You couldn't just make up your own incense recipe. Let's use a little potpourri today. Just be different. No, you didn't do that. But you know what the most important thing about the use of incense, even frankincense, which was incense offered to Jesus as a gift from the wise men, was as the smoke of the incense and the aroma went up into the heavens, up into the sky, the people would, in a sense of, in symbolism, be sending their prayers into that smoke up to God. And the Bible even described that when God smelled, up in heaven, God smells the prayers of his people. It says it was a delightful aroma. It's all figurative speech. It's not that God likes certain smells and doesn't like others. It's not about the smoke. It's really, some people think religion is like magic, or it's like wizardry or sorcery. It's not at all. There are things that are very, very real, and they're a part of our expression. And we enact it. We give it feet. We give it body. It is displayed, or what is real to us is displayed in figurative ways. That's what Zechariah was doing. And all the people out there were lofting their prayers, which were not smoke, which were not aromatic, but the sincere expressions of the people's belief in their Heavenly Father, lofting up to God, and in their mind and in their eyes and in their thoughts, saying, my prayers are being received by God, just like that smoke going up into heaven. And just like that smoke or that incense smells pleasant, I believe that I trust that my prayers are pleasant to God. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. The most important things that could ever happen in your life and mine is that God would interrupt. As I said, I like plans, and I treasure people in our family that will map things out and lead us through a plan or have a goal. I like to accomplish things. I like to achieve. I like to find my mark and hit it. I like to hit the ball, and I like to be in the right place. I believe all of that has to do with being in the groove. I believe that God is leading me and guiding me, and I think that everything around me is God is giving me direction and speaking to me, and everything that's around me, every flower, every tree, every star that I see in the sky, that God is communicating to me through my heart, my eyes, through the wind that blows. It's not mystical or magical. It's just being observant. And for Romans chapter 1, Paul says, you can tell there's a creator by just looking around at the beauty of the creation. I like having a plan. I like to put things in order. I like for things to go 1, 2, and then 3. But I've been a part of many, many things in my life where I've gone 1, 2, and then God says, wait just a minute. Let's do something different. Do something. I want to see if you will get off track to do something different. Jesus told of a man who was on his way to Jericho and he fell among thieves. He was injured. He was left for dead. A priest came walking by, and he was on his way to do this kind of thing right here, once in a lifetime opportunity. And he said, I don't know that person. I was not responsible for hurting him. He should have known better. My daddy said, he shouldn't have been there in the first place. What was he doing there in the first place? That's what my daddy would have said. And which is more important, my service to God or that injured man? And it was no question for that priest. Jesus said that priest just kept a beeline toward the temple because he weighed them. And he says, my service to God is, even if that had been a member of his family over there or a dear friend, he would have said, no, I can't choose that person over God. You see, that's the way we think as humans. That's what religion does. That's what religion does. It says, oh no, that person's dying over there, but I didn't hurt him. It wasn't my responsibility. It's not my fault. And so my duty to God is far, far, far more important than that injured man. Jesus said next a Levite came by, far more important than this is a guy, probably a priest in training, and he saw that person. And he said, if I touch that person over there, he might even be dead. And if I touch him, it will defile me. I'll be corrupted in some way. And so he went on his way, and then came by a Samaritan. They thought Samaritans were just the worst people in the world. And it doesn't say whether he believed in God or not, but he helped that injured man. And I'm sure it wasn't on his agenda. I'm sure that it wasn't a part of his plan. I'm sure that it probably made him late to wherever he was going. I'm sure that it cost him some money. And it was inconvenient. And it wasn't fun. And it wasn't pleasant. This man was seriously injured. And this Samaritan stopped by and he helped that man. Well, Zechariah is doing his religious thing, and the angel of the Lord. Now let me give you a clue right here. Anytime you see, now there are many mentions of angels in the Bible, but when you see a mention of the angel of the Lord, it's the Lord. The angel of the Lord is a phrase that is used in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. And there is no question or doubt that when the angel of the Lord makes an appearance, it is God himself appearing in the form or representation of an angelic being. The angel of the Lord is always the Lord. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled and gripped with fear. Sounds about right. But the angel said to him, "Don't be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer's been heard." Well, he was just praying for the sins of the people. "Your wife Elizabeth will bear a son. You're to call him John. He will be a joy and a delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord, and he is never to take wine or fermented drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he is born." Now this is John, to be John the Baptist. This tells us something about the plan of God. This role that John the Baptist is going to play was prophesied in the Old Testament. Someone was going to come in the spirit of Elijah. People mystify that and make that sound strange too. It just means someone that would remind you of Elijah if you'd ever known Elijah. Someone who was just like Elijah in so many ways. We understand that. It doesn't mean he was reincarnated. It doesn't mean that he was somehow inhabited by the personality of Isaiah, that he was somehow another possessed by Isaiah's ghost. None of that nonsense. What God is doing in the gospel story here, Luke is saying God, from the very beginning, included and incorporated us into the story. John is to be the announcer. He's the forerunner. He's the one to come to trumpet that the king is coming into the city, that there's a parade approaching, and that the royalty is approaching. They had people run before them to prepare the way, to let everybody know, here comes the governor or the king or the procurator or the dignitary. That's what John the Baptist, he was to be the fulfillment of a promise, which indicates that this is a very specific plan of God that's being launched. And that this old man was coming here just to, he thought this was going to be a once in a lifetime, but it was a once in human history thing that was actually going to happen. And something far, far, far more important than his priestly duties. The angel of the Lord was going to appear to him and said, "You know what? You thought your days of being happy were over. You thought your days of being productive were over. You may have thought that you would never have a child." And he says, "And yet now you're going to have a son." This was extraordinary. This is extraordinary. Later on, he comes home to his wife, and it's amazing. Luke tells the rest of this story. How it is discovered that Elizabeth is expecting. She's going to have a baby. And then Luke starts telling the story about how the little girl over in Nazareth, Mary, is being informed that she's going to be a part of the plan of God as well. God is using people. God is using me and you. He's saying, "I've got something wonderful, and you're going to be a part of it." Mary was having a real hard time, and it was difficult. Her story is very strange. And one of the things that God used in order to comfort her heart and encourage her was the angel of Gabriel appeared to her and said, "You need to go over to your cousin Elizabeth. She's going to have a baby." And Even though she's very, very old, she's going to have a baby. And that baby is proof that I am speaking to you and that I have a plan and that this is all exactly as I wish for it to be. This picture right here, I really love this. Mary, she was a woman of great faith, and I adore her. I love Mary. We Baptists are afraid to love Mary. We don't worship her or pray to her. We don't believe she's divine, but we love her. I love Mary. She went to see Elizabeth. And the Bible says that when Mary walked into the room and saw her family member Elizabeth just rejoiced. And she said, the baby inside my womb leapt for joy when you came into the room in the presence of the Savior. Do you know that an unborn baby was the very first person to recognize the importance of Jesus? Don't you ever believe that that unborn baby is not a person, that it's not important, that it's not alive. It was a specific part of God's plan that as John the Baptist sensed, well, you know, the last verse that we read, Luke says that John the Baptist was filled with the Spirit of God even before he was born. Mary walked in the room. Now listen, one of the pastimes that Terry and I had many years ago when she was carrying our children, was watching our children do somersaults inside her. Those babies, you see a foot make an impression on a mother's belly. A face press itself, a nose press itself up against the stomach, and watch that baby roll and hear that mother saying, "Ooh, that was a kick," or "that was a twist." That baby's playing in there and active and moving and growing, and it's aware. It has a different blood type than the mother does. It has a different heart rate. Its respiration is different. Everything about that means that it's a separate person. It's not just her body. It's her body and the body of the baby. They're completely two separate entities. Do you know that sometimes when an expectant mother is injured or is ill, that unborn child will send a part of itself and a part of its own DNA makeup. Stem cells will come from that baby. I've seen it happen. Only a few months after Terry found out that she was expecting Carice, Terry had to be entered into the hospital. She was sick. It scared us to death. But nothing happened to Carice at all. That she was not affected by Terry's illness. And also, it was the process of actually Carice's presence inside of her that helped Terry get well. She was responsible for increasing the health and well-being of her mother from inside. I love this right here. I love unborn babies. I love unborn babies. I believe that they are the treasure of expectant parents. I hear people talk of unwanted children, unwanted pregnancies. People do not plan their lives as God does. They do not let God lead their lives often as He wishes. They might think that trying to follow an unseen God might make us lose all of the joy and celebration and wonder of our lives. Nothing can be farther from the truth. John the Baptist knew that he was in the presence of the Son of God. Neither Jesus nor John had even been born yet. That whole world there is so very important. When Jeremiah was trying to weasel out of the call of God himself, God says, "No, I knew you, and I called you to this destiny even before you were in your mother's womb. I knew you." There's nothing haphazard. The way we conduct our sex lives, the way we scatter our wits about with immoral choices, when we make choices and we say, "It is my choice, my body, my decision, my health, my care," without any regard to the lives of others, to the lives of little babies. There will be a consequence to it. And I can't believe that God would ever bless or condone ending a life just simply because it is an inconvenience to us. Well, this is a wonderful story. It's a Christmas story. And it may be a part of the Christmas story, maybe that you've never examined very closely, but it is a part that I love and cherish the most. God bless you all. I hope that you have a good week. Please pray for us. We have a funeral today in our family. We're going to the Ardmore. Pray for the Warman family. Amber Warman's husband, Jamie, passed away this week. He was a young man. He's going to be buried at the Gatlin Cemetery today at 2:30 up there just beyond the Tennessee border. Also, Wednesday, last Sunday, our dear friend Vic Buell passed away. That's Brian's dad, Nair's husband. There'll be a memorial service this week for him. Pray for Nair and for Chrissy and Brian, for Carice. Touched my heart. My granddaughters said goodbye to their granddaddy this week. And Addison, as parents, we're concerned, grandparents, concerned about the death of a loved one and how it might affect our children. And Addison told her dad, I want to go in, I want to kiss him one more time. Sweet kids. And he was a wonderful man. I am glad for these last 10 years to have been a member or part of his family, to have him as a part of our family, and to be, to know him, to get to know him. I will miss him. God bless you, Vic, in the presence of God today. Pray for us. Funerals and Christmas seem to be contradictory, and yet, because of the life that Jesus came to give, his own life, he is the resurrection and the life. Jesus said, he that believeth in me, even though he die, he will live again. God bless you all.